Kia ora tātou everyone, and welcome to this edition of InFocus, a podcast brought to you by the Law Association. I'm your host Michael Andrew, and each episode we will be sitting down and talking to an inspiring guest connected to the legal sector, listening to their stories as they share their experience, and in the process explore some of the significant work that is being done behind the scenes that impact the industry and our communities. Kia ora tātou everyone, and welcome to the Law Association podcast. I'm your host, Michael Andrew, and I'm very happy to be here today and a part of the show. Every episode we'll be talking to an inspirational person within the legal sector, listening to their stories and experiences, and in the process, exploring some of the most important work that is being done behind the scenes yet has such important implications on New Zealand society. This is especially true today because my first guest is the president of the Auckland Women Lawyers Association, Karlene O'Halloran. An associate at Meredith Connell, Karlene acts for the Commissioner of Police in High Court civil proceedings and also has a background in civil litigation. Karlene, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Why don't we start off with you telling us a little bit about your work with the Auckland Women's Law Association?
So I am the president of the Auckland Women Lawyers Association this year. It's our 40th anniversary year, so that's a big year for us, a big celebration. The Auckland Women Lawyers Association is made up of members of women in the profession and also student members as well. And there are a lot of different facets to the organisation. We're there for networking. We have a strong advocacy branch. We also have scholarships that we offer, and we are basically there as support for women in the profession. Part of that is creating conversation around different issues that women might face, as well as creating resources for our members to access things like we have a parental leave policy resource where we kind of gather information from all different law firms around Auckland on what their parental leave policy is, and we have it all in one space so people can access that before they go and have job interviews, for example, to make sure that their values maybe align with the law firms that they're looking for. And as well, we do a promotion of women survey each year, which reaches out to different law firms around Auckland and asks them about their numbers in terms of women in their firm progressing to partnership. So this year we'll be kind of expanding that to ask law firms about women in equity positions in partnership as well.
Tell me a bit about your career and how you became involved with the Women's Law Association. Obviously, you're an associate for Meredith Connell, which is a busy role in itself, so this must be a whole other realm of responsibility that you've taken on. But what motivated you to, take this on alongside your day job or your role?
Yeah, so for me, it was 2020. I was approached by some committee members because they knew that I did some work with Abortion Law Reform New Zealand, and we had the abortion legislation bill that was coming out, and AWLA wanted to do some submissions on that. And so they asked if I would help with those, and so I ended up drafting the written submissions, and they seemed to be pretty pleased with that, so they asked me to come onto the committee permanently. And I ended up doing the oral submissions to the Parliamentary Select Committee on that as well, with the president at the time, Alicia Murray, and another committee member, Erica Burke, and I really, really enjoyed that. I just loved the advocacy side of being on the committee, and later ended up doing the Safe Areas bill as well. But in my time on there, just being around some incredible women in the profession on the committee, everyone who's kind of got the same kind of values, the same kind of concerns, but just being in an environment where you can talk about it was really inspiring. So I've stayed on the committee since then, and I've been the treasurer at one point. I was vice president last year, and now it's president. So
cool.
Yeah.
And how much time does it demand relative to your associate job?
It is relatively time consuming, but I do enjoy it. So, I find the time for it. And I have a very, very dedicated committee. We have about 15 people on our committee. So everyone's working very, very hard this year with a lot of things that we have planned, especially in terms of the 40th anniversary and various other events that we put on. And so I have a lot of help from some very dedicated people.
I'm interested in what you mentioned before, working on the abortion law reform. So that must have been a really heavy job, right? And obviously there's quite a lot to take in with that whole saga, but did you feel like you and your team, when you were working on it, made really good progress?
When we presented our oral submissions to the Select Committee, they in particular mentioned that they were really impressed with the submissions and thanked us for their thoroughness, because there were quite a few different areas that we wanted to touch on. Obviously, bringing abortion out of the Crimes Act and treating it as a health issue was a main priority for us. But there were a number of different kind of options that the Law Commission suggested for the legislation drafting. AWLA's position was that there shouldn't be any kind of legal test for a person obtaining an abortion. What the legislation settled on was that abortion is an issue between a pregnant person and their doctor up until 20 weeks, and then after that there would be some more checks and balances that needed, or a legal test that needed to be adopted. We argued to the Select Committee that after 20 weeks, the number of abortions that happen are so low and almost entirely are very much wanted pregnancies where something has kind of tragically occurred that means that they can't progress. And so often, in fact almost all of the time, when that happens, a pregnant person is very much in consultation with specialists and their doctors and things like that anyway. So to bring in these tests is kind of just adding a legal kind of barrier. If it causes any delays, then it can actually be a barrier to healthcare and potentially life-saving care as well. So we said that it wasn't necessary, and that kind of perhaps the real reason that the test is there is kind of to appease people who are object to abortions in any circumstance anyway, which isn't really a good reason in our opinion in terms of truly treating abortion care as healthcare. Because there aren't really other circumstances where there's a legal test imposed before you can obtain healthcare.
Yeah. It's interesting that people don't really realise the work that goes on behind these issues. And I think if you're not involved in the legal sector, you're kind of blind to the magnitude. That's what's going on behind the scenes. But obviously you're plugged into that all the time. That must be quite a fulfilling experience for you to be working on these big projects and these pieces of legislation which have such resounding ramifications for these very real issues. Is that something that I guess gets you out of bed every day and really motivates you? Yeah,
I do really like that side of it. I think the thing it also comes down to is we have these big concepts often with law, but when you meet people who are actually affected by them, and in the example of abortion law reform, women who have been denied abortions and have had to carry a pregnancy to full term and have a child, and they actually, when they're being truthful with themselves, and some of them are comfortable enough to tell you, I actually really struggle with my relationship with my child because it was a child that I didn't want. Those are incredibly real stories that you can hear, and it gives you a really strong perspective, I think, when you're thinking about why you're arguing in a certain way. And it's not just kind of these kind of legal concepts. It affects real people, and it can have quite a big effect on someone's life.
Yeah, for sure. And do you get that connection often? Like, I know you're kind of working on these pieces of legislation. You're obviously working in your capacity as a lawyer, but do you sometimes bridge that gap and talk to the people that are affected by it? Like in that instance, you were obviously talking to women who had, mums and whatnot, but when you're working on other projects, do you find you're able to engage with that side of thing as well?
Yeah, we do try to. Obviously, it depends on people coming forward and stuff as well. In my work with the Crown, we tend to, need to have a barrier there, and so this is a way, I guess, for me to help people more directly, or at least speak to people more directly about issues that are, important. So it's a nice way to bridge that gap. Yeah.
Well, you're not so far away, I suppose.
I wanted to do autopsies, and I don't really know why. It just all seemed very interesting. But
Now
definitely,
you're dissecting judgments and legislation,
instead.
rather than people.
But I my strengths were definitely less in science and more, I guess, the power of the pen, so to speak. So I decided to play to those strengths and go to law school instead. And everyone said, "Oh, you're so good at arguing," which I think every lawyer hears. Yeah. And that's true.
I got told that as well. Maybe I should change careers.
It's a good skill to have. I was always into debating at school and stuff like that. And I think with law it's really great because there are just so many facets of it. You can be interested in almost anything and find an area of law that will suit. So for me, advocating for women is a really important part of my practice and what I do. And so being a part of Auckland Women Lawyers Association is a great extension of that, and it's just a way to really get directly involved in the issues, but also have that kind of ability to consult with and work together with incredible women in the profession as well.
Yeah, I suppose in a profession like law, it's when you actually come together with other women who are really inspirational, it means that much more, I suppose, because it has been historically dominated by men. So when you do work with really inspirational women, it's just, it's probably really powerful and really helps you kind of get excited about the industry and the changes that are happening.
Yeah, we actually held a High Court judges panel last week where we had a number of incredible High Court justices. We had the Chief High Court Judge, Justice Fitzgerald. We had Justice Hinton, who's actually just been appointed acting and warrant on the Court of Appeal. We had Justice Peters and our most newly appointed High Court Justice, Justice Wilkinson Smith. And it was an incredible panel, and I'm a huge fangirl of Justice Hinton, and it's no surprise to anyone. But she was saying that, so she was actually made a KC in 2002, I think it was, and at that stage, it was pretty much one woman a year, and it was almost like there was one spot for women, and she talked about how they would kind of sit around and they'd say, oh, you know, who's going to be the female QC at the time?
Really?
Who's going to be the female QC this year?
Out of how many?
I think it depends, but I think there's kind of up to 7 or 8 appointments each year kind of thing. And then it got to the point where she was thinking, why is there only one spot?
Yeah.
You know, why isn't it
like
just...
a quota?
Yeah, kind of like a quota, but at least there's only one. Don't expect anything more. And, you know, when you look at it today, we expect to see women in partnership. We expect to see a number of female KCs to come through each year. We expect to see a number of female lawyers appointed to the bench. It's an expectation now, rather than feeling like you're just grateful for being thrown a bone kind of thing. So that's, I think, really important to be able to speak to women in the profession who have come before you and hear about what they've done, and to change what was the status quo into something that's very different these days, where there's an expectation rather than gratitude for having the bare minimum.
And I suppose also encouraging is that it's not done via a box ticking exercise, but on merit, and not just, okay, we got to like have this gender proportion set, you know, like you do a good job, you do amazing work, and you should be recognised for it, right? That seems to be playing out as well.
Yeah, the calibre of women lawyers in New Zealand is incredibly high. There are just so many impressive women, and that's not to say that the women who are being appointed one a year, you know, were being appointed as a box-ticking exercise at all. They were incredible lawyers, and still are, many of them judges now as well. The first woman QC that was appointed was Sian Elias, who became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of New Zealand. So, you know, there's really no question that the calibre is there and is still there and will always be there. It's just about getting across those unconscious biases that we have and seeing women as leaders and appointing them there, even though their leadership styles might look a little bit different to what a male's leadership style looks like.
It's cool that you're a fangirl of KCs and judges. It's quite unique.
Some people like Taylor Swift.
Posters up on your wall at home.
I think, no, I don't go quite as far as having posters, but that is one of the benefits, I think, of being involved in an association like the Auckland Women Lawyers Association, is you get access to these incredible women because they are so generous with their time for organisations like us. And Justice Hinton is a perfect example of that. But we just enjoy so much support from the bench and from the senior members of our profession, and we appreciate that so much because it gives gravity to the association, but also it gives us that kind of experience and knowledge to draw on as well.
Yeah, I think the paths we take in our careers and our lives are always dictated by these little moments or experiences that we have, like you mentioned when you were working on that legislation. Part
of it is putting yourself out there for it as well, putting your hand up for things that you might not think that you're 100% ready for, but that you're prepared to do the work to make sure that you're ready for it by the time the hearing date rolls around or whatever it is. I have been lucky to have people kind of championing me in my corner, but that was because I went to them and said, I'd really like to do this.
Yeah. And,
was prepared to over-prepare so that I was ready for anything on the day.
This plays into your work with the Women's Law Association and is probably a major theme, I guess, of the upcoming 40th anniversary and the ceremonies around that, I guess, celebrating the progress, but also the issues that still need to be resolved and the work that needs to be done, right?
Yeah. As part of our celebrations, we're doing a past presidents panel where I've arranged for a different woman who's held the position of president over at least one from each decade that AWLA has been in existence. So we're very lucky to have Helen Melrose, who is actually one of our founding president, which is great. And we've got incredible women like Lady Deborah Chambers, KC. We've got Philippa Muir coming on as well. And more recent president, Laura Carter. And so we're going to have all of these women together to talk about what the big issues were when they were president, but also what we see as the issues currently to work on, and what are the steps that we can be taking to start to resolve those issues.
It'd be so fascinating kind of looking at it before and a now and then showcase, because obviously there's just like worlds apart. There's still so much work to be done, but it would just be fascinating looking at how it was during the tenure of that first president, just unrecognisable, I'm sure.
Well, I think there's going to be an aspect of it being worlds apart, but also it's still the same issues.
Yeah. Just
So.
Playing out in a different way, almost, not as overt.
Yeah.
But still insidious and subtle. I don't know. It's. It's. I see it as being a lot more flying under the radar, whereas it would have just been blatant kind of almost misogyny at one point, I suppose.
Exactly, and I think back then it was probably just kind of accepted, whereas now we don't accept it, and so and there is a lot more at the bar, equitable briefing and stuff like that as well. So it's they're the same issues, but they're just slightly different, and there are probably slightly different approaches that we would take to issues these days as maybe what was back in that time.
Do you think the momentum is there, though, in terms of changes? I know there's so much work to be done, but do you feel like it's heading in the right direction? And what else do you think needs to happen for, I guess, that momentum to escalate?
It's a really good question. I don't know if I have, a snappy little answer to it.
Oracle?
I haven't solved that problem yet. Give me to the end of my term. I think there's a lot to do in terms of unconscious bias, and that I hope will help with the profession seeing women as the leaders that they are, but in the style of leadership that is really effective, actually, across the board, but is a more female-style leadership. And it's just acknowledging that there are different styles of leadership and they're equally as effective, and that, you know, despite maybe periods of parental leave or anything like that, that doesn't mean that women need to kind of have their careers stalled and things like that. So I don't have the answer, but I think that it's going to be, I guess, recognition that we can have different pathways and we can have different work styles and leadership styles, but all of those things are really valuable and they bring a lot to the table, but just acknowledging that those things are important, even though they look different to what we're used to.
Yeah. It's so bizarre that the parental leave thing is perceived to be such a hindrance in our society, not just in the legal sector, but in all sectors, you know, like just taking time off to be a mum or, you know, a dad, but mostly a mum, is seen as like such an obstacle to progress and your career advancement. I just don't really understand. Like, it's just such a natural thing to do, an essential thing to do, and it shouldn't really be that much of an issue in terms of where your career's going. Like, it's just taking a break, really.
Well, it's not even taking a break.
Yeah, I suppose not. No,
it's unpaid work.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it is, and I think that's the thing. You know, society wants us to be, you know, having children and keeping the population at a certain level, but the recognition of that work is not where it should be. And it is interesting that it can be a hindrance in terms of career, because I think it's that kind of age-old thing where if it were kind of more of an expectation of maybe our male counterparts to be taking time off to look after children, then you probably wouldn't see levels of career stall.
Yeah.
Because our male counterparts probably wouldn't accept that.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, if they're saying, well, if you're expecting me to, you know, bring a child into the world and grow it up to be a productive citizen, then
they'd be a lot more noisy about it.
Yeah.
Like, or just, yeah,
this is work. This is really hard stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't slept for ages and and my wife's come home and she's demanding dinner. You know, like, it is about attitudes at the end of the day, and until we start recognising unpaid labour as just as important as paid labour, then you're probably still going to have those problems.
Yeah, for sure. I have one more question for you. Why do you like disputes and your team doesn't? What's so interesting about disputes?
So the team I'm in now loves a dispute. Don't worry about that.
Yeah. Oh, it's just to do with your
this is when
love for arguing.
Yeah, well, when I first started in my first law job, it was at a firm that didn't do a lot of in-court work, and anything that did would get, you know, they'd instruct a barrister. And so I don't know why, I just really enjoyed it. It's that problem-solving aspect, but also, you know, kind of needing to find an argument in something and find a good argument for it and stick by it and advocate for someone at the same time. It's all of those things. Yeah. But then also going to court and giving that argument to a judge who, you know, probably already knows the answer. But then when you start getting, I guess, into progressing through law, you start to have the opportunity to argue quite novel arguments in front of a judge, and it is actually about kind of working together a little bit to figure out what the outcome should be for something that hasn't been determined before, and that's really exciting as well. So yeah, there are a lot of kind of cool things about it.
Karlene, thanks so much for coming in and sharing with me today. It's really awesome to hear about your work, and it sounds like you're doing amazing things and serving a really valuable purpose, and it's so interesting to hear how much you love arguing. I hope I can see you in action one day. But no, thanks very much, and all the best for the upcoming 40th anniversary and all the celebrations around that.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I'll get back to the office and keep writing my arguments.
Okay, very cool.